Listen up, y'all. If y'all love true crime stories from murders, cold cases, missing people, or just crazy stories that will have you just shaking your head, subscribe to patreon.com/celebrity underrated for exclusive content to get those type of stories. That's patreon.com/celebrity underrated, or just click the link in the description. You know, they say in Hollywood that it's nothing funnier than seeing a male actor wear a dress and act like a woman for some reason, y'all. Some people think that's the funniest thing in the world, especially a black man in a dress. You know, people laugh when Martin played Shanae, Jamie Foxx played Wanda on In Living Color, Tyler Perry played Medea, Sean Marlon on the White Chicks movie, Eddie Murphy in the Nutty Professor, The Klumps, Norbit, Ricky Smiley wore a dress. Many more actors have done it. White actors too. Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire. Robert De Niro did it. Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie. Tom Hanks, and the list goes on. But there was a guy who took it to another level, though, and became very popular with his character. That's Flip Wilson and his character Geraldine Jones. Actress Whoopi Goldberg said when she was about 14 years old, she had never missed an episode of the Flip Wilson show, and everybody in her school was imitating the character Geraldine. But you know, besides that, Flip Wilson was considered TV's first black superstar, according to Time magazine. He was the first black entertainer to be the host of a successful weekly variety show on the network television. The Flip Wilson show was #1 in the ratings and won him 2 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Writing Achievement for a variety show out of 11 nominations. He also won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor in a Television Series. He won a Grammy Award for his comedy album titled The Devil Made Me Buy This Dress. And you know, he opened the doors for comedians like Richard Pryor and George Carlin, paved the way for people like Arsenio Hall, Keenan Ivory Wayans, Sinbad, and others. Richard Pryor once said that Flip Wilson is the only performer that he's seen who goes on the stage and the audience hopes that he liked them. But you know, Flip was more than just an actor/comedian. People don't know that he was a very intelligent businessman as well. And for some reason, he still doesn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So let's get into the Flip Wilson story, right? Now, Clero Flip Wilson Jr. was born on December 8th, 1933 in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was one of 12 kids from his parents, and his father, Clero Wilson Sr., was a handyman and he did custodial work. Now, growing up, it was rough for Flip because it was during the time of the Great Depression, in which left his father struggling to find work. And you know, Flip had the darkest skin complexion in his family, and his family used to always make fun of him. His father used to tell him that he was black like burnt toast and like a rotten banana, and he told him that he ought to throw him away with the garbage. Wow, that's sad. But that was his little joke for Flip. But that made Flip hate that he was dark-skinned and ashamed to be black. Now, his mother, named Cornelia, ended up leaving his father and ran off with another man, but she took their baby brother with her. She abandoned the family and took all of his father's money and took all of the furniture out the apartment they lived in and everything. So when she did that, Flip and the rest of his siblings and his father became homeless. And they had to stay with his father's sister, who also treated him bad. Now, Flip's aunt's husband treated him bad also. One time, he made Flip put a cardboard on his lap, and he and his friends rolled dice using Flip as a backstop for the game. And Flip said if he moved or nodded off to sleep, his aunt's boyfriend would headbutt him to wake him up. Wow, that's crazy. Then he ended up finding out that one of his father's close friend and an ex-boyfriend of his mother named Leroy Taylor was his real daddy. Flip said he remembered his mother always laughing and saying to him that a guy named Leroy Taylor was his real daddy because they was the same dark skin tone, and she never told Leroy Sr. And Leroy Taylor knew Flip was his son and would treat him good when he was always see him because he had money. He was the first black electrical foreman in New Jersey at the time. He would always give Flip money, and he would take Flip for a ride in his nice car and take him to shows. Flip said one time he took him to see a comedy show, and it was at that show that he decided that he wanted to be a comedian. Now, in elementary school, around the age of 8 years old is when he first got his chance to make people laugh. You know, Flip was in a play called Clara Barton of the Red Cross, and at first now the teacher wanted him to play a wounded soldier. But when the little girl was supposed to play the nurse, when the little girl got sick, Flip knew her lines and he volunteered to play the nurse. And he had everybody in the audience laughing like crazy. That was the first time he put on a wig and act like a woman. And you know, Flip was also good at the game called Dozens, which is when you battle back and forth talking about each other's mothers. Flip said he was good at the game because he didn't care if you talked about his mother because he hated her anyway for abandoning his family and having a son by her ex-boyfriend, and had Leroy Sr. thinking Flip was his son, plus gave him his name. But you know, things was just rough at that time for Flip and the family because someone ended up calling social services and complaining about Flip and his 10 other siblings being in the streets running wild. And that's when a lot of them ended up going to foster homes. Now, Flip ended up going to a foster home of a black Catholic family in a good neighborhood, but they used to beat him badly every time he would pee in the bed. Flip had a problem peeing in the bed. Then that same neighborhood, right, with the new family, the white neighbors, the kids used to call him the N-word all the time. And he hit one of them in the eye with a rake one time, and that's when his foster parents beat him and he ran away from home. But the cops ended up bringing him back, and he just kept running away because of the harsh whippings he would get. And he just kept running away and living in different foster homes. And that's when he was placed in a reform school. And for his 9th birthday, he received his first birthday gift, which was a box of Cracker Jacks and shoe polish from one of the security guards at the reform school who took a liking to him. So after reform school, he went to live with 3 of his siblings at another foster home. But then they had to leave that foster home and then another one. Then he went to another one. And Flip just kept continuing running away from the foster homes. Plus the beatings and the whippings he would receive ended up leaving bad scars on his butt. Then around the age of 14 years old, his father, Leroy Sr., ended up getting his life together. You know, he became a maintenance man in an apartment complex and they gave him an apartment. And that's when Flip moved back in with him. Now, around the age of 16 years old, Flip was tired of being broke, wearing bad clothes and shoes, and he was tired of being hungry all the time. So that's when he joined the Air Force after he lied about his age and convincing his aunt to sign the papers. He convinced his aunt to sign the paper, and he promised her some of the money. That's how he got into the military, when she signed the papers. Plus, you know, he was happy about joining the military because, you know, you got free food, free clothes, And plus, he always wanted to fly a plane. So now in the military, he did experience racism, but it wasn't that bad to him because at least he was far away from New Jersey. And he became an expert typist. And he also tried heroin for the first time while he was in the military. But it was in the military when his comedy career really got started from, he was making people laugh, especially the captains and the sergeants, to the point that they started calling him Flip. They're saying he flipped his lid. That's how he got the nickname Flip. So after he got out of the Air Force in January 1954, now 20 years old, he settled in San Francisco because he didn't want to go back to New Jersey. He knew there was nothing for him back in New Jersey. So he started doing stand-up comedy at a hotel he was working at as a bellman. Then he ended up going on the road and opened up for a band, but he was only making like $1 a night during that time. But then him and one of the band members named Calloway ended up becoming a duo act, selling out shows. People just loved Flip at that time. They just loved the way he act like a woman. The act he had, he would put on a blonde wig and act like a woman. The audience would laugh like crazy, and they loved when he would do his Reverend of the church character, which would later turn into Reverend Leroy. Then him and his friend Calloway ended up splitting up as a duo comedy act because Flip wanted to be a solo comedian. And he just continued doing this comedy act, writing new jokes, going state to state, and even performing for food just to survive. Now, in 1959, he ended up marrying a woman from the Bahamas who was a stripper named Peaches. But then months later, they got divorced. But then he met his common law wife in Miami named Blonell, and they ended up having 4 kids together, but Flip never married her. After that, he ended up working and telling jokes at the Apollo Theater, and that's when he met Moms Mabley and Red Fox. He also became close with Gladys Knight and the Pips at that time, and he would hit the road with them as an opening act. But it was Red Fox who really helped him make it big because, see, when Red Fox went on the Johnny Carson show and said Flip Wilson was the funniest comedian he had heard, that's what did it. Johnny Carson asked Red Fox, "Who's the funniest comedian to you?" And Red Fox said Flip Wilson was the funniest comedian he heard. When Red Fox said that on national television, Johnny Carson wanted him on the show. So when he ended up going on the Johnny Carson show, his career took off. That was it. He became a star overnight. And it got to the point that Johnny Carson loved Flip's comedy so much that he would even sub as a host when Johnny Carson wasn't there. Now, also around that time, he met a Jewish guy named Monty K, who became his manager. And once he came on board, that's when things really started happening for Flip, because once he did the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, that meant that his price went up to perform at clubs, because now everybody knew him from being on national TV. Flip started performing in Las Vegas with singer Bobby Darin. He would also hang out with the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis Jr., and Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra loved him because he was from New Jersey like him. Flip also met Elvis Presley, who was a big fan of his stand-up comedy at the time. Then he ended up releasing his first comedy album titled Funny and Live at the Village Gate. Now, also around that time, he ended up meeting up-and-coming comedians George Carlin, who was 28 years old at the time, and Richard Pryor, who was 25 years old. Flip said that when he first saw Richard Pryor perform at a club, he said Richard Pryor was very shy and had stage fright. He said one night he was shaking so bad that singer Nina Simone had to go on stage and comfort him. Wow, Richard Pryor was shy. Now, on November 13th, 1966, Flip made his first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, and him and Ed Sullivan became real good friends. Then he released his second comedy album titled Cowboys and Colored People on Atlantic Records, And that album was very successful. But, he still lost the Grammy to Bill Cosby comedy album titled Cosby's Revenge. Now, in the following year, in 1968, he released his third comedy album titled You Devil You on his own record label called Little David Records, which was distributed by Atlantic Records. They also had signed comedian George Carlin to the label. Plus, he also made repeated appearances on the groundbreaking sketch comedy series Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. So the money was rolling in. Flip was getting money, and he ended up buying a house in Miami for his baby mother Blondell and the kids. He also had a place in Hollywood Hills, and he brought a brownstone. Plus, he brought his first car ever, which was a Rolls-Royce convertible. So he was in demand at the time. Everybody wanted to see him perform and do his comedy everywhere. Everybody wanted him. He was on the Carol Burnett Show, the Dean Martin Comedy Hour, the Merv Griffin Show, and many more. And with all of that hype around him, the network NBC wanted him to create a show for them because they felt that he could draw in millions of black people for ratings, as well as white people too, because the white people loved him too. And Flip did write a pilot about a show based on current events that was going on in the world at the time. But then Dr. Martin Luther King got assassinated. Then Bobby Kennedy was killed, so that's when NBC never aired the show. Then they let Flip do a special called the Flip Wilson Special. And for the first time on national TV, he did the characters Reverend Leroy of the Church of What's Happening Now, and his most popular character, Geraldine Jones. And the people love Geraldine and the catchphrases. When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. The devil made me do it. What you see is what you get. Plus, she had a boyfriend named Killer. How he came up with the Geraldine character. Flip said when he was about 7 or 8 years old, he had fell in love with a girl named Geraldine, and she was so black that she looked blue. Flip crazy, man. Now, after the success of that special he did on NBC greenlighted him to do his own variety show, and they would pay him $1 million a year at the time. And look, Flip only agreed to do it if they let him own the syndication rights. And they agreed. He can own the syndication rights. So after 15 years of trying to make it in the comedy world, he finally did it. On September 17th, 1970, the Flip Wilson Show aired on NBC and became one of the first American television programs starring a black person in the title role to become highly successful with a white audience. It was the first successful network variety series starring an African American, and during its 2 first seasons, it was the nation's second most watched show, according to Nielsen ratings. He hired Richard Pryor, he hired George Carlin to be on his writing staff, and that show, man, he had a lot of guest appearances on that show. Red Fox came on there, Moms Mabley came on there, Joan Rivers, Lola Falana, Lucille Ball was good friends with him, Bill Cosby, and many more. Some of the musical guests were the Jackson 5, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, the Osmonds, and many more. Flip loved the Jackson 5, and he had a special bond with Michael too. Michael was 13 years old at the time. They was very close. In his first season of the show, or the Flip Wilson Show, he had better ratings than the Mod Squad, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and a bunch of other shows that was #1 at the time. Flip even pulled in more viewers than the Super Bowl at the time. And it's crazy because at the time, it was $72,000 to air a 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl, right? Flip was charging $80,000 if you wanted to air a commercial during his show. Wow. Then he released his next comedy album titled The Devil Made Me Buy This Dress, which hit number 24 on the Billboard R&B albums charts and number 17 on the Billboard 200, and it was certified gold. Plus, it won a Grammy for Best Comedy Recordings at the 13th Annual Grammy Awards. It's crazy because Bill Cosby had won the last 6 Grammy Awards for Best Comedy Recordings. Flip was so popular, man. Let me tell you something. Flip was so popular at the time that they even had to put out a Flip Wilson and a Geraldine doll. There was a doll out. It was a 2-sided Flip Wilson and Geraldine doll where you can pull the string to make it talk, right? And it would say his famous catchphrases like, "The devil made me buy this dress. If I had known you were coming, I would have stayed home. What you see is what you get," and everything. It's crazy. Flip Wilson doll, y'all. But here's the backlash, though. Now, a lot of black people, especially black men at that time, didn't like when he did his character Geraldine. When he did that part on the show, they would turn the TV off because they didn't want their sons seeing that. A man in a woman's dress. Wow. They felt that wasn't the correct way to represent a black man. Some also felt that the Geraldine character was an insult to black women. Now, his other character, Reverend Leroy, a lot of churchgoers felt that was an insult to the black church and God. Wow. But with Flip's success, he opened the doors for Red Fox to get his own show on NBC, which we all know and love, called Sanford and Son. Red Fox also used to help write for the Flip Wilson show too. Now, as time went on and he started making a lot of money, he did more drugs and drinking, especially cocaine. But he also loved to smoke marijuana and even trained his young sons to roll his joints for him. In 1974, he was featured in a movie titled Uptown Saturday Night with Sidney Poitier, Bill Cosby, and Harry Belafonte. But he still would continue to deal with a lot of problems and receive a lot of backlash, though, especially from the black community for his characters playing on that show, Geraldine and Reverend Leroy. Then him and Richard Pryor would start having problems, and, Richard Pryor started calling him a house Negro for NBC, claiming that he forgot who he was. And one time, during the taping of the Flip Wilson show, the audience had booed Richard Pryor after he had barged in the building and pushed one of the ushers, so they started booing him, right? Richard Pryor pulled out his penis and told the whole audience to suck it. Wow. Flip was so mad that he did that on his show, they almost came to blows, but he escorted Richard Pryor off the set. Now, another incident that happened, Richard Pryor had poked a stylist on the Flip Wilson show in the eyes for looking at him in a gay way. And the stylist almost went blind in one of his eyes, and that's when NBC had enough of Richard Pryor and banned him. They banned him from the set of the Flip Wilson show. But, Flip took up for Richard and got him back on the show. After that, the ratings of the show started to get low. And on June 27th, 1974, the Flip Wilson show ended. But, he had a good run. Flip had a good run. 11 Emmy Award nominations. He won 2 of them. Plus, he won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor in a Television Series. And, but the show just got canceled. The ratings was low. Flip decided to end the show. He decided to end the show. He didn't really get canceled. He decided to end the show. Now, after the Flip Wilson show was done, Flip wasn't too worried because his net worth at the time was about $12 to $15 million. Plus, he wanted to spend more time with his kids and be a full-time father because he ended up getting full custody from his common law wife, Blondell. He gave her $1 million for full custody of their kids. But what's sad is this. When the kids started living with him, right, and they started going to all the white schools, because Flip put them in private schools, a lot of the students at the schools would tease them and say that their father Flip was gay because he wore a dress on TV. And they would tell them that the devil made your father wear a dress and all that, be joking and everything. Wow. But then Flip's longtime girlfriend, Sylvia, who had been with him, ended up leaving him because he wouldn't marry her. And she sued Flip for $4 million for her services. Wow. That was his girlfriend. She sued him for $4 million for her services. That's crazy. Then he got engaged to a Playboy bunny. Then on April 14th, 1976, he did a special on CBS called Flip's Sun Valley, some kind of like comedy Winter Olympics type of gig. Months later that same year, on August 24th, 1976, he was filling in for Johnny Carson hosting The Tonight Show, right? And his special guest that night was singer Minnie Riperton. And on that show, she revealed to the world that she had undergone a mastectomy due to breast cancer. She told the world that her cancer had already spread and she was given about 6 months to live. When she had announced that on the show, that made her one of the first celebrities to speak publicly about her condition. And it was Flip. She told Flip on that show. He was devastated when he heard the news because he didn't know. And plus, he was the chairman of the American Cancer Society at that time. When she told the world that messed him up on that show, he was very heartbroken. And later on, before she died, Minnie Riperton said she regretted telling Flip that news suddenly like that because Flip was really shook up. He was really shook up when she told the world that day. But also during that time, he was spending a lot of money buying cocaine, and he was drinking a lot because he became depressed. His show was over, and now new shows like Sanford and Son and Good Times was doing great rating numbers. One day Flip just woke up, man, and had a turning point, and he told himself to leave all the drinking and the drugs alone, and he flushed all the cocaine he had down the toilet and became sober. But he still smoked weed, though. He still smoked weed because that helped him relax, but he just wanted to leave that cocaine alone. Him and Richard Pryor were still close, and Richard Pryor had came over one day and wanted Flip to freebase some coke with him, but Flip refused. But eventually Flip will go back to using cocaine. But then his fiance, who was a Playboy bunny, she broke up with him and sued him for half of his money. Plus, she wanted over $12,000 a month from him. Then he started dating a young dental assistant. She broke up with him and demanded $7,500 for wifey duties. Wow. It got to the point that Flip was bringing a new girlfriend home every 4 months. Young girls. And they all wanted his money. And that's when he got a vasectomy just in case he accidentally got a woman pregnant. Then he ended up marrying a Thailand girl named Cookie, and they got divorced years later, and he had to pay her spousal support. After that, him and his manager, Monty K, had a falling out, and Flip blamed him for his career not going the way he wanted it to go and accused him of stealing money, so he fired him. They went their separate ways. In March 1981, Flip was arrested and charged with possession of a small amount of cocaine. Now, the story goes, it was him and his nephew, Rashawn Khan. They was at the LAX airport, and an anonymous caller, who was an informant, had alerted authorities that Flip had drugs, which had a street value of about $1,000 in his possession. So when the police searched his luggage, they found 2.5 grams of cocaine, several grams of hash oil, and a small quantity of marijuana in his possession. So he was arrested and released on a $2,500 bail. But, Flip ended up beating that charge because the California Supreme Court ruled unanimously that police had no legal reason to stop Flip and his nephew. Plus, the prosecutors refused to say where they got the information from about the drugs. And the judge dismissed the charges. But that whole case, that whole airport case and the drugs led to him being dropped from a Diet 7-Up advertising campaign he was about to do with his character Geraldine. So he lost that gig. Then he had got sued after a man was killed while trying to trace a source of unusual odors coming from a septic tank at his beachfront home. The worker was buried alive in a 6-foot hole he had dug in the sand while excavating under the porch. Now, Flip paid for his funeral and he gave the man's wife $95,000, but she still sued him and filed a wrongful death suit 3 months later, seeking $500,000 for herself and their 3 children. After that, Flip had got a call one day from CBS to do a TV sitcom and to be a rival against The Cosby Show on NBC. And in 1985, he starred on the show called Charlie and Company as Charlie Richmond. Charlie Richmond was a black middle-class employee of the Division of Highways. His wife, named Diana, a school teacher, was played by singer Gladys Knight. 16-year-old son named Junior was played by actor Christophe St. John. 15-year-old daughter named Lauren was played by Fran Robinson. And 9-year-old Robert was played by Jaleel White, who we all know from the show Family Matters. That's Urkel, Steve Urkel. Della Reese played his sister-in-law, Rachel. And, Flip was excited to do the show because he had already been successful playing a woman. Now he wanted to be successful just playing a man. But the show ratings was very low. And, Flip was trying to get the writers of the show to change a lot of the corny lines. And they was trying to tell him how to be funny. They even tried to get him to do his, the ratings was so low, right? They tried to get Flip to do his character Geraldine voice for some of the lines. Wow. That's how desperate they was. But at that point, Flip was just tired of doing Geraldine and didn't like doing the character anymore. Nowhere. When fans would even ask him to do Geraldine, he wouldn't. He felt he created a monster with that character. He was done with it. And after one season of that show, 18 episodes, they did 18 episodes, the show Charlie and Company was canceled due to low ratings. In 1993, a motorcycle accident left Flip's son, David, who was a professional golf player, paralyzed from his shoulders down and unable to walk or stand on both of his feet. He had broke his spine in the accident. And after that had happened, Flip became depressed and continued to use more drugs. Then, in 1998, he started to notice he was losing weight, in which he was glad because he wanted to lose the gut he had. Flip started to notice he was losing a lot of weight. But then he started to feel pain in his stomach. That started to hurt so bad that sometimes he couldn't even stand up straight. Now, the doctor thought at first that it was just liver stones caused by high cholesterol, but then he went to see a specialist. And that's when they told him that they found a tumor and he had liver cancer. And there was nothing they can do, and they gave him 2 to 3 months to live. And once Flip found out that, he just continued to do drugs, hoping that it would ease pain, but it didn't help. Now, he did end up finding a surgeon who was willing to operate to remove the tumor, but just didn't work. And on November 25th, 1998, a day before Thanksgiving, Flip Wilson died from liver cancer. Flip told his kids that he didn't want a funeral, but some close friends of his still had a service for him. And his family members didn't like the way they did that service. And what's crazy is, like I said earlier, Flip doesn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame yet. He don't got one, y'all. But, he did have a clause in his will. Flip had a clause in his will that provided funding for annual scholarships at Rutgers University and other schools across the nation for students who wanted to study journalism. That was in his will. Flip was 64 years old. Rest in peace, Flip Wilson.